Awesome. So as I said, you can have these custom connections, and then this is what it looks like in the UI. This was the SSH example. Here's the Snowflake example, where I added these 3 widgets for the database role and warehouse, and the rest still works the same. One thing when you migrate that you're going to find is that where previously the con type was optional, so you didn't have to specify a connection type originally. Because of this feature, they made connection type mandatory. So you need, when you migrate, you will have to add a connection type to all of your connections. Yeah, that's basically that's the connection types feature. I'm pretty excited about this personally, but yeah, this is. It doesn't feel like a big one, but I think it's quite nice. Any questions on that? 1, 2, 3. Then let's go to maybe the most important part of the presentation, how to upgrade. And I thought about making a couple of slides, but really it's quite easy to make the jump. So I think the easiest thing to do is to just go through this how-to guide with you guys real quick, and share this link with you, and then you will see this is actually fairly straightforward. Everything you need to do is in here. So the first thing is upgrade to Python 3. Just because Airflow 2.0 doesn't support Python 2 anymore. The second thing, and I think this is quite nice, is there's a bridge release that's 1.10.14. So this release basically it's a bridge release in the sense that everything, like if it works in Airflow 2, it will also work in Airflow 1.10.14. So you can use this release to change whatever you need to change without breaking anything. And then when it's time to upgrade to Airflow 2, you already know that everything's going to work, because you can make it work in this environment, and then make that upgrade. So really what you want to do is to do 2 different upgrades. First, you want to upgrade to 1.10.14, make everything work. And once that is done, then you want to upgrade for Airflow 2. So then there's the upgrade check scripts. This is fairly straightforward. This is a separate package that you can install. And this is essentially just a CLI command. And then it will give you, it will basically check everything if it's ready to be merged, to be upgraded to Airflow 2. So it will tell you, for example, this DAG is going to break, or this custom operator doesn't look correct, or anything in that regard, or your configuration has these specifications, but they are outdated in Airflow 2, or for example, some configurations change the naming. For example, some of the logging configurations, which were previously in the core subsection of your config, now move to a separate logging subsection of the config. It looks for this and basically tell you all the configurations that you need to change to make it workable with the Airflow 2. So this is very nice. There are so-called backport providers. So because a lot of the operators that were previously installed via Airflow itself have now moved into these separate provider packages, and for many of them also some logic changed. They introduced the so-called backport providers, which work like the new custom providers that you can use in that way. So for example, when you install this, you can use this line, as I said, from providers, then the provider name, operators, import the operator. You can use this line to import that operator. And then when you move to Airflow 2, you will use a different package because you're going to use the provider package, the correct one, not the backport package. But this line of code is going to stay the same. So this way you can upgrade your DAGs from Airflow 1 to Airflow 2, but use the correct syntax already in your DAGs. Make sure that your DAGs run successfully before making the jump. Then, of course, there's some details that change for templating, for example, to the Kubernetes pod operator. All the details are listed here. Basically, what you want to do is just make sure your DAGs run. So do all the above. If they fail, do whatever you need to do to make them run. And if they run, then you already know, okay, you're ready for the upgrade. The step 6, configuration settings. Already talked about this. This one might be a relevant one for some of you. So the legacy UI is dropped, so you must use the RBAC UI now. It's very easy to set up, but that's essentially another breaking change. You need to upgrade your configuration settings. Already mentioned that. And then there's a change to the Kubernetes executor. That's, as I said, I'm not very knowledgeable about that. The details are also described here. And then finally, you can do your upgrade. And there's a change to the CLI as well as part of this upgrade. For example, Airflow upgrade DB doesn't work anymore. Instead, it's this command because they basically grouped the CLI commands. There's a group of commands for the users, like Airflow users add. There's some for the metadata database, which is like Airflow DB upgrade, all that kind of stuff. This is basically it, really. This is how you upgrade. This is really, it's not hard to do. I recommend you guys check it out. If you have questions, let me know. It was really, the upgrade to Airflow 2 was not very difficult at all. The only caveat is, I would say, wait until Airflow 2.0.1, because there are still quite a few bugs that are going to be removed in that version, and you don't need to have the headache of trying to figure out why something breaks when it's really an Airflow specific bug and not nothing on your end. So yeah. Any questions on that so far?
Maybe one question from my side. How long do you reckon we can still stay on the current Airflow version without upgrading? Mm-hmm. Is there at some point that we will definitely need many of the new features, or can we also wait for 2.3, 2.4 way down the road?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not a member of the Airflow committee. They are still maintaining Airflow 1. They are not planning on having any minor releases, so they will only have patch releases, no minors anymore. So 1.4, 10. It's definitely going to be the last one, and probably 1.10.14 is even going to be the last one. So if there's anything that you might want to use that might be a bug in that version, or that might, there's nothing that is going to be ported, nothing new is going to be ported back to Airflow 1. So can you use Airflow 1? I mean, if it's working for you right now, you can use it indefinitely. But I would not expect them to do anything with the Airflow 1 except maybe like super egregious bug fixes. But since Airflow 1 has been around quite a while, I don't think there's too many of that. So I would say you probably want to upgrade soon-ish. Having said that, whether it's next week or in 2 months is probably not going to make a difference. So I would say, I think 3 months is probably a good timeline to make the change. I wouldn't stay much longer than that. And as I said, one part of the reason for this talk is, I think, to take a bit the fear of upgrading, because it really is quite easy. But on the other hand, as I said, there are a couple of bugs. So I think the ideal change frame is from in a week, from when 2.0.1 is released. From then, probably something like 2 or 3 months after that, I would recommend to change.
Okay, very good. Thanks.
My pleasure. So finally, in one thing I'd like to share, not really Airflow related that much, but this is something that I've been working on, and that I'd like to try to figure out how it can help other people outside of our clients, which is the Eva package. This is not really ready to be shared yet. I just want to give you a quick overview and get some feedback from you guys. So rather than trying to make you use it, I'd like to give you maybe a 5-minute talk of what it is, and maybe you guys have an idea of what would be nice features where you would say, okay, if you can do this, I would use this. I know one of them is a good documentation, which doesn't exist right now. This is on the to-do list. But maybe anything else, and any feedback, whether you say like, okay, this is something it's too complicated, or if it's something that maybe you can imagine using. So Eva is, as I said, a provider package, and it's basically a Python package that I use in my in my Airflow installations, because it has a lot of abstractions, essentially DAG factories that allow me to create specific types of DAGs on the fly, and in particular, I use it for data loading. So I abstracted away data loading task a little bit, and what I basically want to do is make it very easy to write data loading DAGs. And here I have one example where this is like for AirCall, which is like a SaaS with a straightforward REST API, and which has a couple of tasks, which is basically one kickoff task, which prepares the data warehouse for the new data coming in, then one task per table that I'm loading, and then a final task, which basically does some renaming and basically drops old schemas and renames schemas to get to have everything in production and to supply the new data in the data warehouse. And the way that it works is that you have 10 lines of code, which is this file. In your DAX folder, you would only have 2 files, which is the DAX.py file, and this is going to be these 10 lines. And this is a DAG factory, which basically creates the DAGs based on a YAML file. And in the YAML file, which is the one here below, you basically do all the configuration. And the configuration for the AirCall, for example, would be very straightforward, which says, okay, I have this AirCall operator. This is what I want to, where I want to get the data. This is the schema in the data warehouse. And this is the connection name where I get the data from. And these are the tables that I want to use, that I want to get. And then everything else is basically abstracted in a custom AirCall operator. And you can basically say if there, it depends on the operator what you can customize here. But in the operator itself, it basically what it does is it calls the hook to get the data from from a specific amount of time to it, from one to the other, and the hook itself is going to be where it basically loads the data, which is just calling those requests and yielding the data for the upload. So basically, I've written quite a few of these operators and hooks to get data from source and upload it to a data warehouse, abstracted a lot of the logic away, and the goal is to have YAML files where you configure your sources and then just load the data into the data warehouse. So this is basically how you would go on using it. And in practice, so this might be what it looks like. So it's running right now in Docker locally in my environment. And you can already see the new Airflow UI. And you can see the various DAGs that are defined in my YAML file. And for example, the Airflow, this one, that the AirCall DAG that I just showed you, is then basically creates the DAGs and all the tasks and runs them. And you can do this with some incremental loading. Like if you have data that has an updated add field, it will take that and just incrementally load it. Or you can just do full refresh, that kind of stuff. That's essentially it. So it's that's the EVA package. It's MIT licensed. It's open source. This is, I think I shared the link in the presentation as well. Yep, it's right there. It is. You can take a look at all the operators and all the hooks in there, and feel free to take a look or to steal any code that you want to steal. Yeah, it's basically optimized to load raw data and then push the raw data to a data warehouse, and then use dbt to do all the transformations in that data warehouse. And it also has a dbt operator, so it has basically a helper DAG where I built a dbt operator that you can also use to basically do your dbt runs in Airflow, which is this dbt DAGs factory. And yeah, this is the very, very short tour of it. So I guess my opening question of the Q&A is going to be, what can I do to make you guys interested in using this? And in general, in the Q&A, I mean, I didn't plan this as a one-to-many conversation, but if you guys have anything you want to discuss about data engineering, please feel free to shoot. Please feel to use this forum with quite a few experienced data engineers to discuss anything. Yeah, with that, I'd like to open the Q&A with this question. What can I do besides detailed documentation? What would be something where you say, okay, this is something you would use, whereas this is something that is probably too high of an entry barrier for you to use on your own? Any takers?
So maybe from my side, so I've already been looking at the EVA library that you provided, also because you set it up for us, and I then was wondering, hey, where do all the DAGs lie? And then kind of went down this path, and in the end arrived there, and then took a look at all the operators. So first of all, great respect for setting all this up. So I think most people have only seen a fraction of the operators that you've already built. So it's quite a exhaustive library already. So yeah, really impressive what you already provided there.
Okay.
But the difficulty for me really lied in, and I have to admit, I'm not a data engineer, so I'm probably the least knowing person in this group, to really understand the connections with the YAML files, where the DAGs that I've built on my own were all contained in a normal Python file. So now you only had the 4 DAGs in the YAML file, pull it out, and then create your own Python file. That was a connection that I didn't grasp in the beginning and still think I haven't quite grasped.
So that's basically, how does Airflow know the DAGs, or is that?
Yeah, they just didn't go and provided all the DAG files in a normal Python, but just had them in the YAML file, which then pulls the operator from the EVA library.
Yep, yeah. That's a good question. So here, this is I'm not sharing my screen anymore, right? Let's continue sharing this. So the way that Airflow works in general is that it runs the py files and then looks if there are any DAGs in this py file. So when it's done running it, so it checks all the files that are py, then tries to imports them, and then looks at everything that exists in these files, and then checks, is there something of the type DAG? Is there a variable of type DAG in there? And if so, it will import it. So what I did is write this function that basically creates a list of DAGs from the YAML file. So you need to have these 10 lines of code, otherwise the YAML itself is not enough. So you have to have this py file, and then Airflow runs this py file, and then it imports the YAML file, and then it runs all the code and creates the operator. So in the YAML file, you will have basically a string that will tell it, here, that's the operator. It's called aircall. And then I have a matching in Eva. And then it says, oh, this is the aircall operator, use this operator class. And then it creates the DAGs from there. And what you need to do then is have this line, because the Airflow, if you don't have this line of code, the DAG is not going to be discoverable by Airflow. And this is basically the hack that I use to make it discoverable by Airflow when it runs through the file. So this is the connection from the Airflow run. Airflow runs the DAGs py file. The DAGs py file runs this function, and then this is what you do to make the DAG available to Airflow. And this, by the way, is what you need to do whenever you have a dynamic DAG creation. So the first time I used this wasn't actually related to this library, but this might be interesting for anyone else also who is interested in building DAG factories or building functions that return DAGs. You have to basically have this line of code. If you don't use the standard way of creating DAGs, which is either the context manager here like this, or no, this is also or like the DAG equals DAG way of instantiating the object and then using the task operators. Is that the question you had?
Yeah, that's actually pretty much the question I had. Very well answered. Thank you for that. Because that's the only thing I did have a few troubles with. But of course, if Airflow then just goes into the Python file, then from there takes all of the operators that are in the YAML file, and then basically returns all of the actual DAGs. That's pretty smart and easy to overview way of handling it.
It's I was hoping to even not need this initially when I started this project, but unfortunately I didn't get I couldn't figure out how to do this without changing Airflow installation itself. So one thing I like about this is that you can have a plain vanilla Airflow installation and you can use it for everything else, and just have this as an additional feature. And you can also have your AI and ML scripts that you're using or anything else that you use, and just have this as DAGs. So this is something I like. And the one thing, of course, that is really necessary is the docs, and parts of the docs is going to be something that that gives you a list of the operators, right, and tells you what's the name of it. Because right now you have to know what name it is, right? You have to know that the name of is aircall and that kind of stuff, because this is it's a constant. We have like a list somewhere which basically just matches it. See, and I don't even know where this list is. So this is something that I see is quite important, but I would say this is, of course, on my list to give you, okay, these are the operators, those are the names, like this is how you can use them.
Very cool.
Anything else you guys want to talk about regarding Airflow regarding anything in data engineering. I guess that's a no.
I would have one other question
Yes,
without
please
boring the other guys, maybe. What is the advantage of having the DBT operators also in Airflow instead of running DBT separately?
Yeah, I put a lot of thought in this question, and the answer is it depends. So DBT itself is a command line tool, so you don't need Airflow, right? For me, Airflow was always primarily a data loading tool, where I just get the raw data from source into the data warehouse, and then I use DBT to do the transformations. And as I said, the only tool I like more than Airflow is DBT, so I really, really recommend using it. Essentially, the question is, how do you schedule DBT? Because DBT, basically, you need to have some kind of production run that just regularly runs. That's really it. So, and if you already have a scheduler, why not use the scheduler? Of course, if you don't use Airflow, there's like then setting up Airflow to use DBT would be complete overkill. There's DBT Cloud that you can use, which is free if you only have one user, and which gives you a user interface, which is nice. You can click around, set your environments, all that kind of stuff. But really, everything that is basically set is just also an interface where you can add your connection to your data warehouse, just like you have connections in Airflow, and somewhere where you can say, okay, I want it to run every hour, just like you can do in Airflow, and then it basically just uses, what it does is it pulls, you can connect it to a Git repo, it pulls the Git repo, runs DBT, gives you the output in the log, and maybe sends you an email if it's successful or if it failed. And I was like, I can do the same thing in the DBT operator. So I built that operator that does really exactly the same thing. It just pulls the repository from GitHub, creates a virtual environment, installs DBT in the correct version, and then runs DBT, and then is basically done with it. And I would always use it if you already have DBT, if you already use Airflow anyway. But if you don't use Airflow, just go with DBT Cloud. And even if you use Airflow, you can also use with DBT Cloud. It's not a big deal. But this way, I just programmed it once, and I can always deploy it. And of course, it was a bit of a hassle, because in Airflow, what you're going to have is that DBT is going to have dependency conflict with Airflow. So you're going to have to figure out a way to run it if you want to run it in Airflow. So what you can't do is just use a Python operator. What you could do is a Python virtual env operator. But then you have to figure out, okay, how are you going to do the git pull, and how are you going to work with the logs? Because if you're anything like me, you're going to hit F5 a lot when running something, and the virtual env operator has some issues with saving the logs and showing it in real time. And there were some other issues that I didn't like about it. So then I decided to write a custom operator, and that's also part of the Eva package. And somewhere here. It's in the utils. And you can use this to run. You can just use it in your own DAGs, or there's also a DAG factory that I built that usually I use with my clients. And then, or you can just read it in the repository and build your own. It just takes your arguments. What's your Git link? Which version to run? What commands to run? Do you have an SSH tunnel that you need to keep alive? And then just runs the commands. It's essentially like a complicated bash operator.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. I think you're muted, Alan. You're talking.
Still nothing? Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Support BigQuery. I know you said it somewhere as a planned data warehouse, but how concrete are these plans?
Sorry, I didn't get the first.
Plan to support BigQuery as a data warehouse.
Oh yes, this is
You have
actually
it
on
planned?
this is on my table right now. So ASAP is the answer to that. The issue in quote issue with BigQuery is that BigQuery thinks like the logic of BigQuery data warehouses is a bit different to traditional data warehouses, where you in traditional database like Postgres or Redshift or Snowflake, it's basically a relational database, and you copy your data from primary source to there, and you have some DDL statements, and you can update your tables, and you basically have they have all that data there. BigQuery doesn't really like to work like that. BigQuery likes to work more in a fashion where you just append the data and maybe even duplicate the data many times. And then in your transformations, you will then figure out, okay, what's actually the most current data, which has pros and cons, which makes sense. And it's very nice because, I mean, it makes seeing changes over time easier, especially for data sources that only give you a status quo. There are other ways to doing that, of course, for example, DBT snapshots, which I can recommend, but that's very nice. But the why I haven't implemented BigQuery is essentially because the logic I have used so far is specialized for the RDBMS, and I haven't written a logic yet that properly works with BigQuery, because the BigQuery SDK itself is pretty straightforward to use. I should be able to just import it. You know, the way the operators work is they pull the data and then call a function, and then based on what configuration you did for your data warehouse, it just calls the upload function. And in this upload function, I should just be able to say, okay, upload this data with this SDK. The only issue is the logic that I'm going to use is a bit different, as I said, in BigQuery. So I can't give you a timeline, but I would be very surprised if it's not done by the end of February.
Cool. That sounds promising. I'd definitely be interested to have a look then when it's available.
So that's good. So now I know that this is a feature that people request, so I can prioritize it higher. Okie doke. If you guys have any additional questions, let me know. Most of you are in the BI Berlin Slack channel. If you're wondering what's the BI Berlin Slack channel, also let me know. I can invite you there. Then most of you also have my email. Either you are in the BI Berlin Slack channel, which has my email, or you definitely have my email. So let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for the feedback as well. And I will, when we have docs and when we have BigQuery, I will start also pushing the EVA library a bit more. It's very nice to get some feedback on that. And yeah, if you have any questions on Airflow 2 or anything else, hit me up.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, man, for taking the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. Take care.
Yeah, take care. Good weekend, guys. Bye.
Bye.